I'm Lauren Adler, 29 years old, and I worked my way through college and law school while supporting my family through tough times. For years, I gave everything, my time, my money, my loyalty, to keep them afloat. But when they chose my brother's game night over my cancer surgery, I made a decision that changed everything. Have you ever been hurt or overlooked by someone you sacrificed so much for? If that sounds familiar, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about setting boundaries and taking back your power. What happened next might surprise you. My name is Lauren Adler, and I'm 29 years old. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the steady one. My mom used to say I was born calm, like nothing ever rattled me. I didn't cry much as a baby, didn't throw tantrums as a toddler. I followed rules, got good grades, and did what was expected. My younger brother, Chase, was the opposite. Loud, dramatic, constantly in motion. He had a flair for chaos that somehow never got him in real trouble. When he was 6, he threw a baseball through the living room window and blamed a bird. My parents believed him. I was 10 and grounded for not supervising. That was the first time I remember realizing the rules didn't apply to Chase the way they did to me. But it wasn't the last, not even close. We grew up in a suburb outside Seattle. Our house was modest, 2 stories, narrow backyard, old carpet that never seemed to stay clean, but my mom kept it spotless, and my dad insisted we treat it like a privilege, not a given. We weren't poor, but we hovered close to the edge sometimes. Dad worked construction. Mom did part-time bookkeeping for a small firm that eventually went under. Money conversations were always behind closed doors, but I learned early to read the tension in the room. When I was 15, I started picking up tutoring jobs for younger kids in the neighborhood. By senior year of high school, I had 5 regular clients and spent weekends grading their assignments in between my own. I saved every dollar. My goal wasn't flashy, I just didn't want to be a burden. I knew college would be expensive, and I didn't expect my parents to help much. I also didn't ask. Chase, on the other hand, floated through school like it was background noise. He barely passed his classes, forgot assignments, missed tests, but my parents always had an excuse ready. He's just creative. Traditional school doesn't suit his personality. We don't want to crush his spirit. He got a drum set for his 13th birthday, even though he had never expressed a serious interest in music before. He banged on it for 6 weeks and then never touched it again. The same thing happened with a DSLR camera, a keyboard, a short-lived business selling stickers online. They called it supporting his passions. Meanwhile, I applied to colleges on my own, wrote the essays in my bedroom after dinner, reviewed financial aid documents while Chase watched YouTube videos on the living room TV. I got into 4 schools. My first choice offered a partial scholarship, but the tuition gap was still too wide. I picked the in-state university with a strong pre-law program and a full ride. My parents said they were proud of me, but they didn't come to the orientation. Said they were too busy with Chase's track meet. He came in 6th place and still got balloons. I worked 2 jobs all 4 years of college, weekdays at the campus library, weekends at a call center downtown. I kept my GPA high enough to qualify for law school scholarships, and by senior year, I had acceptance letters from 3 top-tier programs. The best one was across the country, in New York. I remember showing the letter to my parents during dinner one night. They both read it in silence, then went back to their food. "Do you really want to move that far?" my mom asked finally. "New York is a long way from home." "I think it's the right next step," I said. My dad nodded without looking up. "As long as you can pay for it yourself." I did, with loans, fellowships, and more work than I care to remember. I didn't take a summer off once. I clerked for family court my first break, interned at a nonprofit the next, then worked 12-hour days at a litigation firm the summer before my final year. I had no social life, no time for anything outside of school and survival. But I did it. I graduated with honors and passed the bar on my first try. Chase, meanwhile, had dropped out of community college after 1 semester. He started a YouTube channel for a while, then worked part-time at a vape shop, then got into board games. Not casually, obsessively. Every call home involved some new tournament he was organizing, some new strategy he was learning. Our parents were weirdly excited about it. "It keeps him engaged," Mom would say. "He's found his thing." When I landed my first full-time job at a mid-sized firm, I called home to tell them. It wasn't a dream job, but it paid well, had benefits, and gave me enough security to finally breathe a little. My dad said, "That's great, Lauren," and immediately asked if I could help Chase with a down payment for a car. He needed it to drive to his board game nights. I gave him a loan, $2,000. He never paid me back. Still, I stayed involved. I helped them file taxes, managed a few of their medical bills when Dad got injured and needed surgery. They gave me power of attorney after his second operation, just in case. I made sure all the paperwork was in order, that they'd be protected if something happened. I visited when I could, sent money when they asked. I didn't expect gratitude, but I did hope, quietly, foolishly, that at some point they might recognize how much I was doing. 2 years ago, I got sick. It started with fatigue and stomach pain, then grew worse. After a few misdiagnoses and a lot of waiting, I found out I had colon cancer. I was 27. It wasn't the worst kind, but it wasn't nothing. Stage II. The doctors recommended surgery followed by several months of treatment. I was scared. Not just because of the diagnosis, but because for the first time, I couldn't pretend I was invincible. I called my parents from the hospital room where they gave me the news. Mom answered on speaker. Chase was in the background, talking loudly about some board game expansion he was planning. When I said the word cancer, everything got quiet. "Oh, honey," my mom said, "are you sure?" "The doctors are," I replied. "What do they want to do?" "Surgery, as soon as possible." "Okay, when?" "Next Friday." There was a pause. Then she said, "Oh no, that's the same night as Chase's championship." I waited for her to walk it back, to say of course they'd be there, to ask how they could help. Instead, my dad got on the line. "It's a big deal for your brother," he said. "He's worked hard for this." "I have cancer," I said, not sure they'd heard me. "You'll be in good hands," Mom added. "You're strong, you've always been strong. We can't disappoint Chase, he needs this." I didn't say anything else. I hung up, went home, packed a hospital bag. I made the arrangements myself, booked a rideshare to the hospital, called a friend to pick me up after the procedure. I didn't cry that night. I didn't tell anyone except my closest friend, who offered to fly out but couldn't because of her own commitments. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time my parents had shown up for me without needing to be asked. I couldn't think of one. The morning of the surgery, I arrived at the hospital by myself. I checked in, signed forms, answered questions. I changed into a gown and waited. I watched families walk in together, husbands and wives, mothers and daughters, grown sons wheeling in their fathers. I sat alone until the nurse called my name. "You don't have anyone with you today?" she asked gently. "No," I said, "just me." She nodded like she saw it all the time. Maybe she did. While they prepped me, I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, then my email, then a folder I'd created over a year ago when I first took on power of attorney for my parents. I looked through the documents, the account information, the authority I held legally over their financial lives. And I started making some decisions. Quiet ones, important ones. Ones they would never see coming. But that part comes later. When Chase moved back home after dropping out, things changed fast. He said it was temporary, just until he figured things out. That was 3 years ago. At first, he picked up a part-time job at a local cafe. It didn't last. He said the manager micromanaged him and that the scheduling was too rigid for someone trying to build something bigger. That something turned out to be board games. Not just playing them, organizing, hosting. Designing, as he put it, though I never saw a single original game come out of it. He started a meetup group that gathered every Friday night in our parents' garage. Then Tuesdays got added. Then Sundays. He made flyers, designed logos, talked about building a brand. My parents called it a community. I called it a hobby with an overinflated sense of purpose. What surprised me wasn't his commitment to it, it was theirs. Within weeks, my mom had turned the guest room into a supply closet for his board games. Custom shelves lined the walls. My dad added new lighting in the garage and insulated it, so people wouldn't freeze during game night. They bought folding chairs, a snack fridge, even a credit card reader, just in case he started charging for tournaments. I tried to be supportive at first. I even sent him a website template he could use if he ever wanted to turn it into a real business. He never replied. The next time I called home, all they talked about was his latest tournament. It was some multi-day strategy game with over a dozen players, and apparently Chase was in the semifinals. They sounded like he'd made it to the Olympics. When I finally got a word into mention, I'd had my third round of chemo that week, my mom said. Oh no, that again? Is it really that bad? I paused. It's cancer, Mom. I know, sweetheart, but you're doing okay, right? You always bounce back. I didn't say anything. There didn't seem to be a point. That became the pattern. I'd call to update them on treatment or ask a question about something medical, and they'd steer the conversation back to Chase's tournaments. Once, while I was explaining side effects from a new medication, my dad interrupted with, "Hang on, he's about to win something." Then the phone went silent except for cheering in the background. When he finally came back, he said, "Sorry, can you repeat that?" After a while, I stopped calling as often. I figured if they wanted to know how I was doing, they'd ask. They didn't. It's not that they were cruel. They never told me to stop talking about my health. They sent a card once after a particularly rough round of treatment, and Mom included a Starbucks gift card. But the calls always ended with, "We'll be thinking of you," followed by a 5-minute story about Chase's latest game night turnout or how he'd reached 200 members in his online community. When my oncologist scheduled a minor outpatient procedure, I asked my mom if she could fly out, just for a weekend. I had someone to take me to the hospital, but I didn't want to recover alone. She hesitated. It's just Chase already planned a big weekend event. He rented a space at the rec center and everything. People are coming in from out of town. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I asked, "You can't come even for one day?" "We'd have to cancel on everyone," she said, "and he's been working so hard on this." "I have cancer," I said. I didn't mean to say it like that. I wasn't trying to guilt her. I was just tired. "I know, sweetheart, but this isn't life-threatening, right? You'll be fine. It's not like you're going through it alone." Except I was, at least when it came to them. My friend Sadie ended up flying out instead. She brought food, stayed with me the whole weekend, helped me walk around the block when I was too sore to sit still. She wasn't family, but she showed up like one. That summer, I started noticing little things that made the divide even more obvious. My mom posted a photo on Facebook of Chase surrounded by friends at one of his game nights. She captioned it, "Proud doesn't even begin to cover it." The same week, I'd shared a post about a nonprofit I'd started volunteering with, one that helps young cancer patients navigate medical bills. Mom liked the post, but no comment, no share, no proud. During one of our few calls that season, I mentioned I was working fewer hours to focus on recovery. My dad asked if I'd be okay financially. When I said yes, he sighed with relief. "Good, we've had to help Chase a bit more lately. He's putting everything into the league." He meant their money. Rent, food, utilities. They covered it all while he ran game nights and made TikToks about strategy tips. I asked once if they were worried about him never becoming independent. My mom's voice got defensive. "He's building something, you have your law degree, he needs more support." It wasn't just the support. It was the tone. Like I had somehow taken up all my share of help by surviving cancer and getting through law school. Like asking them to care was somehow ungrateful. One Sunday afternoon, I called during a break between treatments. I just wanted to hear a familiar voice. When my mom picked up, she sounded breathless. "We're in the middle of something," she said. I asked if everything was okay. "It's the final round of the summer tournament. Chase is hosting 20 people today. We're just setting up snacks. Can you call later?" "I was hoping to talk for a bit," I said. "It's been a rough week." "You're strong," she said again. "You always get through things. Just let me know how it goes, okay?" Then she hung up. That night, I sat on my balcony and watched the sky darken. I thought about how much of my adult life had been shaped by trying not to ask too much. How often I had justified their behavior, told myself they were doing their best, that maybe I was just sensitive. But the truth was simpler than that. They didn't treat me badly. They just didn't treat me like I mattered the same way Chase did. And when I needed them most, they had a full house and a cooler full of sodas, and a board game trophy they were helping their son assemble. I was the one they assumed would always figure it out, the dependable one, the self-sufficient one. It had stopped feeling like a compliment a long time ago. It felt like a script I didn't write, but had to perform anyway. And for the first time, I was thinking about what would happen if I stopped performing. If I stopped making it easy for them to ignore what they didn't want to see. Because I wasn't going to keep competing with someone who didn't even know there was a contest. And I wasn't going to keep protecting people who couldn't be bothered to show up for me when I needed the simplest thing, their presence. So I started taking notes. Quietly, carefully, not out of spite, just clarity. And eventually, that clarity turned into a plan. The surgery was scheduled for a Friday morning, early enough to give me time to recover over the weekend before starting chemotherapy. It was serious, stage II colon cancer. The doctors were clear it wasn't a death sentence, but the timing was critical. Delay could make everything worse. I told my parents the date as soon as it was confirmed. I wanted to make sure they could be there. Not because I expected grand gestures or dramatic support, but simply because it felt like the bare minimum. Family shows up for each other during moments like this, or at least, that's what I believed. 2 weeks before surgery, I called to let them know again. My mom said, "We'll clear the calendar, Lauren. We want to be there for you." It sounded sincere. I hung up feeling a little lighter, like maybe this was finally a moment they understood. The week before surgery, I called again to remind them. My mom answered, but this time her voice was clipped. "Oh, that's this weekend," she said. "Yes, Friday morning," I replied. There was a pause, and then my dad's voice came on the line. "It's game night, sweetheart. We can't cancel on him." "Who?" "Chase," Dad said. "He's got the championship tournament. It's the biggest event of the year. We've promised to be there." I swallowed hard. "But this is important, Dad. It's my surgery." "You'll be fine, you're strong." It wasn't even a question. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't ask what that made me. Instead, I packed my overnight bag and ordered a cab. I was alone. When I arrived at the hospital, the usual nurse greeted me with a warm smile. She noticed I was by myself and asked if I needed a family member or friend for support. I shook my head and said I was okay. The prep was routine. IVs, blood work, the usual questions. I tried to focus on the positives, the doctors, the procedure, the fact that it was supposed to fix everything. The last thing I remember before they wheeled me away was looking out the window and seeing a family walking together, laughing, holding hands, a father pushing his daughter in a wheelchair. When I woke up, the room was quiet. No flowers. No cards. No waiting room filled with familiar faces. No one. My phone was on silent in my bag. I checked for messages. Nothing. No missed calls. No texts. No voicemails. The nurse came in to check on me. "Your family called earlier but left a message with the front desk," she said. I hadn't heard it. I asked if she could play it for me. "It just said they couldn't make it," she explained, "and that you'd be fine." I nodded. That was the extent of it. The rest of the day blurred into a haze of medication, vitals, and exhaustion. I wanted to be angry, but the numbness took over. Later, when I was strong enough to sit up, I called my mom. She answered after a few rings, her voice tired and strained. "How are you feeling?" "Okay," I said quietly. "We're sorry we missed it. We were with Chase. You know how important this is." I did know. I knew better than anyone. And that's when it hit me. They'd chosen a game night over my cancer surgery. Not a concert. Not a family reunion. A board game tournament. I didn't say anything more. I put the phone down and stared at the hospital ceiling. The betrayal wasn't in the missed surgery alone. It was in the calmness. The matter-of-fact way they dismissed my reality. The casual way they prioritized something trivial over the fight of my life. I was 27 years old, lying in a hospital bed, recovering from major surgery. And my family was out celebrating a victory they deemed more important. For days after surgery, I kept checking my phone, waiting for a call, a message, a sign they cared. Nothing came. It wasn't that they forgot. They didn't forget. They chose to look away. I began to realize that for them, I was invisible unless I was convenient. That night, a nurse brought me a get well card. It was from my oncologist's office. Signed by the staff. handwritten messages from strangers who barely knew me. They cared more than my family did. The days after surgery were physically painful, but the loneliness was sharper. My friend Sadie came to visit and sat with me for hours, telling stories, distracting me. She never mentioned my parents. Neither did I. I realized then that I didn't have a family. Not the kind I needed. But I had something else. Power. Legal power. They'd given it to me without realizing the full weight. The power to protect. The power to decide. And that power was mine to wield. I kept that thought close as I began the long road of recovery. It wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, I wasn't willing to be the person who forgave everything just to keep the peace. Not anymore. They had crossed a line I intended to redraw. Quietly, deliberately, with purpose, because I deserved more than their empty apologies and hollow excuses. I deserved respect. I deserved loyalty. And I was ready to take it back. The day after surgery, I woke up to the soft clatter of a tray being set down on the table beside my bed. A nurse peeked in and asked, "Has your family arrived yet?" I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. She offered a sympathetic smile, like she understood more than I was ready to say. My phone was on silent, but I checked it anyway. No missed calls, no texts, no voicemails. Just nothing. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, willing myself not to cry. Not because I was ashamed of tears, I was, but because I was exhausted and I didn't want to waste energy feeling sorry for a family who had already made their choice. Later that afternoon, my best friend Sadie showed up with homemade soup and a stack of magazines. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just sat beside me, talking about light things, the weather, a new show on Netflix, her recent trip to Portland. After a while, she turned and looked at me with that calm, steady expression she always had. "Lauren," she said gently, "why do you still give them everything?" I blinked. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't meant to hurt me. It was honest. The question caught me off guard. Everything. Your time, your energy, your money, your patience, your hope. I didn't have an answer, not a good one anyway. I thought about the years I'd poured into keeping the family together. The late nights on the phone calming my parents' worries. The weekends I sacrificed to help Chase with school projects or job applications, even when he barely appreciated it. The bank transfers I'd made, the bills I'd paid to keep things afloat. All while watching them celebrate my brothers, every minor achievement like it was a national holiday. "Because they're my family," I said finally, and I guess I thought that was enough. Sadie reached over and squeezed my hand. "It should be enough, but it doesn't have to be all." That night, when the apartment was silent and I was alone with my thoughts, something I'd pushed aside for months floated back up. After Dad's second stroke last year, he and Mom had been struggling to manage bills and medical paperwork. They asked me to step in, to take care of things on their behalf. I had power of attorney, legal access to their accounts, the ability to sign documents, make decisions. It was meant to be a temporary measure. I'd never given it much thought. But now, lying there, the weight of it settled over me like a cold wave. I didn't need to yell at them. I didn't need to confront them with accusations or arguments. I had leverage. Quiet, legal leverage. It wasn't about revenge in the dramatic sense. It was about protecting myself and taking control of a situation where I'd been powerless for too long. I could manage their finances. I could decide who benefited from their estate. I could stop the cycle of neglect. I sat up slowly, the hospital gown feeling heavy around me. I reached for my phone and opened the folder labeled Family Documents. Bank statements. Investment portfolios. Legal forms. Insurance policies. I read through everything again. Notes from our last meetings with attorneys. Copies of wills and powers of attorney. Detailed instructions Dad had given me about medical decisions. The realization hit me clearly. I had responsibilities now, and more than that, I had choices. For years, I had accepted their behavior as unchangeable, as if I were stuck playing a role scripted by others. But this wasn't just about sacrifice anymore. It was about boundaries, about reclaiming my dignity, about saying silently but firmly, I am here, I am important, and I will not be sidelined. Over the next few days, while my body healed, my mind worked in a different way. The cancer treatments, the physical pain, the emotional exhaustion, they were all real. But beneath it was a growing determination that surprised even me. I thought back to the last time I'd spoken with Mom and Dad, the way they'd brushed off my surgery in favor of Chase's tournament. The way they'd been so quick to assume I'd be okay on my own. It stung, but it also clarified everything. If they weren't going to show up for me, I'd stop showing up for them. Not in anger. Not out of spite. Because I finally understood that respect wasn't something I had to beg for. It was something I had to claim. The next call I made was to my lawyer, a woman I'd met years ago through work. I asked her to review all the documents related to power of attorney and estate planning. I wanted to be sure I understood exactly what I could do. What I should do. She confirmed what I already suspected. My position was strong. I had the authority to manage their accounts, to make decisions about assets, and to amend wills or trusts if necessary. She cautioned me to act carefully, to think strategically. This wasn't a battle to win with fireworks and noise. It was a chess game. Quiet moves. Measured steps. Each one designed to protect what mattered to me. That night, I lay in bed thinking about what I wanted the future to look like. Not just for myself, but for the family I still cared about. I didn't want to hurt them. I wanted to be seen. To be valued. To be treated like I mattered. But if that wasn't going to happen on their terms, then I would make it happen on mine. Because I was done waiting. Done hoping. Done forgiving without reciprocity. That night, I made a promise to myself. No more being the invisible daughter. No more being the backup plan. No more allowing others to decide my worth. I was ready to take control. Not with anger or blame, but with quiet strength. And the power I never knew I had. When I was discharged from the hospital, I went home to an apartment that felt both familiar and alien. The walls held memories of better times, but now every quiet corner echoed with the absence of the support I'd expected and deserved. I unpacked my bags slowly, methodically, and then sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and a folder I'd prepared before surgery. It contained scanned copies of all the legal documents related to my parents' affairs, the powers of attorney, bank statements, insurance policies, wills, and trusts. I'd spent the past week organizing everything, making notes, and planning the next steps. I didn't want to make a scene. I wasn't interested in retribution for the sake of hurting anyone, but I needed to establish control, quiet control. I started by calling their bank. The customer service representative was polite but professional. I confirmed my identity and my legal authority to make adjustments on their accounts. I didn't empty their accounts. I didn't freeze their cards. Instead, I updated contact information and added alerts to flag any unusual activity. I put safeguards in place to protect their finances without causing alarm. Next, I called their insurance provider. I reviewed policies and beneficiaries. I updated contact emails to ensure I received all correspondence. I made notes of upcoming premium payments and medical claims. My parents didn't know any of this was happening. The last call was to their lawyer's office. I requested copies of the latest wills and trusts, making sure I had the most current versions. I also asked about the possibility of updating beneficiaries and how the process worked if one wished to make changes. That call felt like crossing a line I hadn't thought I'd cross. I spent the next several days reading legal documents and consulting quietly with my lawyer. I learned that while I couldn't alter their wills unilaterally, I could ensure they knew about any lapses or inconsistencies. I could help them make informed decisions if they were willing to listen. But in the meantime, I made one decisive change. I removed them as beneficiaries from my own will. It wasn't an act of spite, it was a boundary. For years, I'd written them into my plans by default, assuming family ties meant unconditional support and recognition. Now I saw those assumptions for what they were, vulnerabilities to be protected. I sealed copies of all the documents and stored them safely, knowing I might never need to use them, but wanting to have them close. The hardest part was keeping all of the secret. I didn't tell my parents I'd made these changes. I didn't threaten or confront them. Instead, I watched. A week later, the first sign came, a call from my mom. "Lauren," she said, voice tentative, "Chase just launched a Kickstarter for a new board game. It's really exciting. Can you help us out, even a little?" I paused. I thought about my medical bills, the prescriptions I still needed, the follow-up appointments looming ahead. "I'm focusing on my health expenses right now," I said. "I can't." There was a long sigh. "You've changed," she said softly. "I don't know what's happened, but you're different." I didn't argue. The silence that followed said more than words ever could. In the days that followed, I noticed the shift in how my family communicated. Calls were less frequent. Messages were shorter. Invitations stopped altogether. They had realized I wasn't the easy fallback anymore. That I wasn't the daughter who would quietly pick up the pieces, cover debts, or excuse their behavior without question. At work, I felt the weight of these changes too. Friends and colleagues noticed my distracted mood, my tendency to keep conversations surface level. When I finally confided in Sadie, she nodded knowingly. "It's not just about them," she said. "It's about you finally standing up for yourself." I wasn't sure I had the energy to fight, but I did know I had the will. The most unexpected consequence was the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't healing. It was a vacuum. Without their presence, my world felt emptier, lonelier, but also clearer. I had room to breathe, to heal, to rebuild. One afternoon, I got a text from Chase. It was a photo of him smiling, holding a board game trophy. "Wish you could have been here," it said. I wanted to reply, to say something supportive, but I didn't. I was too busy building my own life, on my own terms. The decision to use my legal authority wasn't about punishment. It was about reclaiming my voice, setting boundaries where there had been none, protecting myself from the neglect that had shaped so much of my past, and silently watching as the world I'd known began to shift beneath my feet. Because sometimes, the quietest moves speak the loudest. In the months after I quietly made the changes, things began to shift in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. At first, it was little things, small disruptions that only hinted at the bigger unraveling beneath the surface. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was my dad. His voice was confused and a little strained. "Lauren," he said, "I got a letter from the IRS. Something about our tax filings being late? I don't understand. I thought you were handling all that." I took a deep breath. "I am," I said carefully, "but there was a delay in the documents they needed. I'm sorting it out." "Can you fix it? We don't want penalties." "I'm on it," I assured him. The next week, my mom called panicked. "The house insurance, it lapsed," she said. "I forgot to send the payment." "You forgot?" I asked quietly. I was overwhelmed, Lauren, with everything. I didn't say anything. But I made sure the premium was paid before the next deadline. A few days later, an automated alert came through my phone. A payment from their checking account bounced. I checked the details. It was a car payment, late by 2 weeks. My parents had never been late before. I called Dad again. "We need to get this back on track," I said. "We're trying," he replied, "but it's been hard managing all this." Chase's Kickstarter campaign for his board game launched with a lot of fanfare. They had high hopes. Mom sent me a message. "Chase is so excited. We believe this will be his breakthrough." But the reality was different. The campaign didn't meet its goal. Backers dropped out. The support they'd counted on never materialized. A week later, I got a call from my mom, voice trembling. "We don't know what went wrong," she said. I offered a quiet, measured response. "I'm focusing on my recovery," I told her. "You understand." There was a pause. "Of course." I could tell the strain was there, even if it wasn't spoken aloud. Meanwhile, my own life was changing too. I started a consulting gig with a small nonprofit focused on helping cancer patients navigate insurance claims and treatment options. It was meaningful work. It kept me connected to a community that understood the stakes. I also joined a cancer support group, where people shared stories without judgment or pity. It was a place to process pain and find strength. Outside of that, I took time to update my own estate plan. I made sure that everything I had, my savings, my investments, my business, was protected and designated to people who had been present through the struggle. People who had shown up when it mattered. I thought about how much time and energy I'd spent trying to fit into a family dynamic that didn't recognize my worth. Now I was building something new. Something solid. Something real. A foundation that didn't depend on conditional approval. Sometimes, during quiet moments, I'd catch myself reflecting on how different things had become. My parents no longer called as often. When they did, I answered politely but kept conversations brief. I didn't want to reopen wounds. I didn't want to drag them into conflicts they seemed unwilling to confront. My relationship with Chase remained distant and strained. He messaged occasionally, updates about game nights or new designs. I read them, then deleted them. I couldn't muster the energy to engage. It was as if a wall had been quietly built between us. Not out of hatred, but out of self-preservation. At work, I found myself more focused. The consulting role gave me purpose beyond survival. I saw the impact of my efforts. Small victories accumulated into steady progress. One evening, I received an email from the cancer support group coordinator. They were organizing a fundraising event. They wanted me to speak about my journey. I hesitated. Public speaking wasn't my strength. But I agreed. Standing in front of a room of strangers, sharing my story, was both terrifying and liberating. I realized that sharing my experience wasn't just about healing. It was about reclaiming my voice, about transforming pain into action. It was the first step in a longer process of rebuilding not just my health, but my sense of self. At home, I organized my legal documents again. Reviewed the wills, the powers of attorney, the beneficiary designations. I made a list of changes I wanted to propose, if and when the time was right. I didn't rush. I waited. Patience became its own kind of power. While my parents and Chase struggled with the consequences of their choices and neglect, I moved forward quietly. Stronger. More grounded. More certain of who I was and what I deserved. And somewhere in the silence between us, the old family structure was breaking apart. Not with anger. Not with confrontation. But with the steady, unyielding force of transformation. I wasn't the same person they had overlooked. I wasn't the child they had taken for granted. I was becoming the woman who would never be invisible again. 3 months had passed since the subtle but deliberate distance I'd created between myself and my parents. Life had settled into a quieter rhythm, one where I no longer felt obligated to fill the gaps left by their absence. I was growing into a version of myself I hadn't known I could be, calmer, more focused, guarded but not closed off. And then, one evening, there was a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart skipped a beat before I opened it. My mom stood there, holding a large container of homemade soup wrapped in a towel. Her eyes looked tired but sincere. "I thought you might like this," she said softly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She didn't ask for money. She didn't mention the Kickstarter. She didn't bring up Chase or the missed surgery. Instead, she sat on the couch quietly, her hands folded in her lap, and after a long pause, she said something I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. "We were wrong." I didn't say anything, I just listened. It was the first time she'd acknowledged anything without deflection or excuses. The words weren't accompanied by tears or apologies, just a simple admission of fault that felt more powerful than any speech. We sat together in silence for a while. I wasn't sure if it was a beginning or an end. Maybe it was both. A few weeks after that visit, a card arrived in the mail. It was from Dad. No phone call. No email. Just a card. Inside, the message was brief and without qualifiers. "We're proud of you. No guilt. No demands. No requests." Just those 3 words. I folded the card carefully and put it in a drawer, unsure of what to make of it. I hadn't reinstated them as beneficiaries in my will. That boundary remained firmly in place. But I did start answering their calls again. On my terms. With clear limits. I would listen. I would engage. But I would no longer carry the weight of their neglect. Over time, our conversations shifted subtly. Mom told me about the garden she'd started, how the tomatoes were doing well this year. Dad mentioned a book he was reading about mindfulness. They stopped asking for financial help. They stopped using Chase as the centerpiece of every update. In turn, I shared a little more about my work, my health, the support group meetings. We found small ways to reconnect, cautiously but sincerely. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. It's a slow process, built on consistent actions and honest intentions. I'm not naive enough to believe everything will be perfect. There are still moments when the old patterns threaten to resurface, when I feel the pull of resentment or the sting of past wounds. But those moments don't define us anymore. I've learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges. They protect the space where connection can grow, but only if respect is mutual. For the first time, I feel like I'm part of a family that's learning to see me, not as a caretaker or a default, but as a person worthy of care and presence. That doesn't erase the past, but it does offer a future. One where I'm no longer waiting for others to show up. Because I'm showing up for myself. It's been a year since my surgery, since the night I went under alone and woke up to silence. The cancer is gone now, or at least in remission. I'm healthy enough to work full-time again, juggling a consulting job and a few volunteer projects that keep me connected to a community that values presence and support. For the first time in a long time, I'm surrounded by people who don't need reminders to care. My parents are still in my life, but they're no longer the center of it. They've faded into the background in a way that feels less like abandonment and more like choice, both theirs and mine. My mom calls sometimes, mostly to check in without expectation. Dad sends occasional texts with updates on his health or a book recommendation. They still have their routines, their interests, their lives. But those lives don't revolve around me anymore, and mine doesn't revolve around them. Chase, he invited me to a game night last month. I got the message late, just a simple, casual text. "Hey, hope you're doing well. We're having a game night Friday. Would love to see you." I read it twice. I thought about it for a moment. And then I declined, politely but firmly. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to punish. I just didn't need to be there. Because I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about distance. About clarity. About reclaiming control over the narrative of my life. When I was lying in that hospital bed, vulnerable and alone, I made choices. Quiet ones. Powerful ones. I took control of my health. My finances. My future. I didn't do it to hurt anyone. I did it to protect myself. To draw boundaries that had been missing for too long. And that control, it changed everything. It freed me from the invisible role I'd been cast in: the responsible daughter, the forgiving sister, the caretaker who never stopped giving. Instead, I became the architect of my own story. I chose who was in it. I chose what I would accept. I chose how I would show up. Looking back, I understand now that love isn't about sacrifice alone. It's about respect. It's about presence. It's about mutual care. I gave my family my loyalty, my time, my energy. And when that wasn't enough, I learned to give those things to myself instead. There's no grand reconciliation. No dramatic confrontation. No sweeping declarations. Just a quiet realignment. A family still connected, but no longer defined by old patterns of neglect. I'm still healing, still growing. But I'm doing it on my own terms. And that makes all the difference. Because sometimes, the most important victories are the ones that happen quietly, inside us. And sometimes, the greatest power lies in choosing when to walk away, when to step back, and when to hold on. I don't need them to apologize. I don't need Chase to understand. I just need peace. And I have it. Finally. Thanks for listening to my story. Have you ever been put last by people you trusted most? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your experiences. Drop a comment below and let's support each other. If you found this story meaningful, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up for yourself and reclaiming your worth. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let me know.